The Empire of Ghana dominated West Africa for nearly 500 years. However, by the 12th century CE, the empire was on its last legs and many of its vassals had broken off and declared their independence. One of these newly independent vassals was the Soso kingdom, led by their tyrannical king, Sumanguru. By the time Sumanguru became the leader of the Soso, Ghana was mostly Muslim, but very weak. The Soso practiced traditional African religions, though Islam was beginning to spread amongst them as well. In fact, Sumanguru's nephew, Fakoli Karoma, was a Muslim. Muslim or not, Sumanguru was determined to take as much land from Ghana as he could. As the son of a blacksmith, he enjoyed the full support of the blacksmith fraternity. The blacksmiths supplied his army with plentiful weapons and material support. Blacksmiths held a special place in West African society. They were a powerful yet mysterious group of men who brought metal out of the ground and fashioned it into all sorts of weapons and tools. The blacksmiths held their secrets close and maintained a tight fraternity. In fact, the African blacksmith fraternity is older than Freemasonry, the closest European counterpart. Before long, the lands under Sumanguru's control had grown from a single village to almost half of the former Ghana Empire. Even Ghana itself was not safe as the Soso attacked their former master and forced the once proud empire to pay tribute. But all was not well with the Soso kingdom. Despite his military successes, Sumanguru was despised by most of his new subjects. He was a cruel man and his armies killed indiscriminately. He massacred several leading African Muslim families, which angered the Arab and Berber kingdoms of North Africa. They did not want to do business with this king who had so much Muslim blood on his hands. Ruling a kingdom takes money, and Sumanguru did not have much. So he did the only thing he could do. He raised taxes and looked for more lands to conquer. The Malinke peoples of West Africa are comprised of various different ethnic groups. These included Sumanguru's Soso kingdom as well as the Soninke of the Ghana Empire. However, one of the largest Mandi branches was the Malinke ethnic group. The Malinke settled in the southwestern region of what is now Mali. At some point in history, the Malinke broke into 12 clans, or hunter guilds. These 12 guilds used to fight amongst each other, but eventually the kings came together to create a governing body called the Grand Council. The Grand Council of Kings would choose one of their own to be the overall leader, who was given the title of Mansa. Until the 11th century, the Malinke mostly practiced some form of traditional African religion, but during the reign of Mansa Barmadana, they were suffering through a severe drought. A visiting Almoravid ambassador from Morocco encouraged the Mansa to accept Islam and pray for an end to the drought. The Mansa did just that, and sure enough, the drought ended. Soon the other members of the Grand Council followed suit, and it wasn't long before most of the Malinke were Muslim. However, Islam was fairly new to them, and it was not yet an established part of their society. That would not happen for many centuries. By the early 13th century, the Keita clan of the Malinke had held the title of Mansa for almost 300 years. While Sumanguru was busy gobbling up the remnants of Ghana, Fata Kung Makan, or Fata the Handsome, was the ruling Mansa of the Malinke. Even though Fata Kung already had 3 wives and 14 children, his soothsayers told him that he would marry at least once more. This new wife, they told him, would not be beautiful at all, but despite her plain looks, she would bear a son who would be the Alexander of Africa. Sure enough, one day 2 Malinke hunters presented Fata Kung with a woman they rescued from a witch. The woman was named Sogolon, and she was indeed rather hideous. But remembering the prophecy, Fata Kung decided to marry her anyway. Within a few years, Sogolon gave birth to first a girl and then a boy. The boy was named Sundiata Keita, meaning the hungering lion, but everyone just called him by his nickname, Sundjata. If Sundjata was to be Africa's Alexander, it certainly did not start out that way. For whatever reason, the boy did not develop properly and could not walk for the first 7 years of his life. Perhaps embittered by this disorder, Sundjata was an angry and spiteful child. In fact, Sundjata only had 2 friends, his half-brother Bukhari and his father's griot, Balafaseki. On top of that, one of Fata Kung's other wives, named Sasuma, treated Sundjata and his mother horribly. Sasuma never lost an opportunity to make fun of Sundjata's disability or his mother's looks. It did not help that Sasuma also had a son close to Sundjata's age whom she wanted to succeed their father. Fata Kung did what he could to protect Sundjata and his mother from Sasuma's cruelty, but he had bigger issues to deal with. Sumanguru and the Soso had forced the Malinke to pay tribute, but now they wanted even more. Fata Kung refused to pay any extra, and Sumanguru was threatening to invade. Fata Kung sent his griot, Balafaseki, to negotiate with Sumanguru. But when Sumanguru heard Balafaseki's beautiful oratory, he decided to keep the griot for himself, and he still insisted the Malinke pay the increased tribute. Sundjata was 7 years old when this happened and still crawling around in the dirt. The loss of his friend sparked something inside the young boy. He talked one of his father's blacksmiths into making him a pair of leg braces. Then, with the help of his brother Bukhari, his sister Kolokon, and his mother Sogolon, Sundjata learned to walk. Once he learned to walk, the world changed for Sundjata. He was no longer bitter and started making friends with the other princes. He excelled at hunting, which in a society ruled by hunter guilds made him a favored son. Sundjata's successes, however, did not change Sasuma's hatred for him and his mother. If anything, it made her hate them even more as Sundjata was growing into a fine young man. Everything came to a head when Fata Kung died and it was time to choose a successor. First, Sasuma sent a message to Sumanguru saying that if he supported her son's claim, she would make sure the Malinke paid the increased tribute. Then, she went to the Grand Council and argued that her son, Tuman, should be the next Mansa. There was some confusion as to which child was born first, but she was able to convince them that her son was the rightful successor. The Grand Council agreed, and Tuman was made king of the Malinke. But Sasuma was not done with her plotting. Afraid that Sundjata might one day challenge her son, she arranged for him to be killed. She visited 9 different sorcerers and paid them to put a curse on Sundjata that would result in his death. However, Sundjata's generosity saved him. After another successful hunt, Sundjata shared his catch with the sorcerers. Touched by his generosity, the sorcerers decided to spare his life. They told him about Sasuma's plan and advised him to flee the country. Heeding their advice, Sundjata and his mother fled Mali and took refuge in various smaller kingdoms and villages. Everywhere Sundjata went, he made new allies and friends. In the kingdom of Jideba, he played the king in Wari, an African game similar to chess. Sundjata won, and the king rewarded him with a sword. In the village of Tabon, he befriended the ruler there who pledged his blacksmiths and warriors to Sundjata's cause. In the remnants of the Empire of Ghana, Sundjata formed an alliance with the ruling Sise family. And in Mima, the king was so fond of Sundjata, he began calling him his son. The king's warriors taught Sundjata how to fight and how to lead an army. Sundjata was in exile for at least 7 years. During this period, relations between his home country of Mali and the overlord Sumanguru had deteriorated. Perhaps the ruler of Mali, that is Sundjata's half-brother Tuman, stopped paying Sumanguru's tribute. Perhaps the tribute was raised. Whatever happened, Sumanguru invaded Mali and killed most of the princes, including Tuman. With no leader and the ruling Keita family nearly wiped out, the Mali Grand Council sent a delegation to find Sundjata. They found him in Mima and begged him to return to lead his people. However, Sundjata's mother had fallen ill and he refused to leave her side. But when she learned that her son was needed back home, she prayed for his success and died a few moments later. Now Sundjata was free to return home. Sundjata returned to Mali ready to free his country from Sumanguru, but the people of Mali were in no condition to fight. They were a broken, defeated people, and Sundjata had to rely on the allies he made during his exile. In the early stages of the war, all of his cavalry, infantry, and archers were made up of foreign soldiers. A long war began between Sundjata and Sumanguru. For several years, neither side could get any clear advantage over the other. But the tide turned in Sundjata's favor when Sumanguru could not control his lust on two separate occasions. The first came when Sumanguru betrayed his nephew and most capable general, Fakoli Koroma. Fakoli Koroma captured Niani, the capital of Mali, for Sumanguru. Then Fakoli Koroma killed the king of Niani and married his wife. However, Sumanguru took a liking to the dead king's wife and forced her to marry him instead. This angered Fakoli Koroma, who defected and joined sides with Sundjata. The loss of Fakoli Koroma was a major blow to Sumanguru, but not as bad as what came next. Sundjata sent his sister to infiltrate Sumanguru's household and gather information. She did her job a little too well. She seduced Sumanguru and learned all of his military and personal weaknesses. She passed this information on to Sundjata, who used it to his full advantage. What followed were a string of victories for Sundjata. One by one, the towns and villages of Mali were liberated. As Sundjata's armies came through, the Malian men found their courage and joined up with him. The final battle took place at Kirina in the Kulikoro region of modern-day western Mali. Even though Sumanguru was severely weakened, his forces were still formidable. They put up a strong fight and were able to hold Sundjata's army at bay. But leaning on his leadership skills, Sundjata organized the hunters of his army into a single fighting force. The hunters used to hunt at night, and Sundjata used that to his advantage. For the first time in Africa, night raids became a standard tactic. Sumanguru was defeated and ran off, never to be heard from again. The lands of the Sosa were subjugated, and Sundjata made them pay a heavy price. The surviving men were forced into the army as slave soldiers, and most of the women and children were enslaved as well. Balafaseki, the old griot who Sumanguru had kidnapped, reunited with Sundjata and began composing songs in his honor. Sundjata was crowned the ruler of the Malinke people and the first emperor of Mali. And Mali was now indeed an empire. In addition to its original lands, it also included the captured lands of the Soso, the former lands of the Ghana Empire, and the lands of Sundjata's various allies. The relationship between Mali and these other lands varied greatly. Those lands that had allied with Sundjata, such as Ghana and Mima, were very independent. It was really more of a loose federation, but those nations that had allied with Sumanguru had little, if any, independence. They were considered vassals and ruled directly by either Sundjata or one of his royal slaves. There were also challenges to Sundjata's authority. Out west, in what is now southern Senegal, the Jolof king refused to accept Sundjata's rule. The Jolof had previously been allied with Sumanguru. At first, Sundjata tried the peaceful route. He sent a delegation with gold presents to the Jolof, but the king refused the gifts and insulted Sundjata's representatives. Sundjata then sent one of his greatest generals, Tida Maken, with a large army. Tida Maken defeated the Jolof and captured their lands. But he did not stop there. He pushed north into the Gambia River region and then into Upper Senegal. Tida Maken did not stop there either. From northern Senegal, he continued into the Arab and Berber regions of Mauritania, going as far as modern-day Walata in eastern Mauritania. The only thing that kept Tida Maken from going further north was the Sahara Desert. There were other uprisings against Sundjata, many of them coming from within Mali. One by one, Sundjata suppressed all of them, eventually forging an empire covering most of modern West Africa. Finally, Sundjata was the undisputed ruler of the Empire of Mali. He made his generals kings over the lands they conquered, but he was the king of kings and given the ancient title of Mansa. Sundjata continued to use the Grand Council, but it was expanded far beyond its simple tribal origins. The council now included generals, local chiefs, and various princes and lesser kings. The Grand Council created a constitution that laid out a basic set of rules to govern the empire. They also formalized the relationship between Mali and its vassals, and they established and enforced laws and guidelines to govern the people. With peace came prosperity. The Arab and Berber kingdoms of the north re-established their trade routes, and Mali's economy boomed. And while Sundjata may not have been the most devout Muslim, he was Muslim nonetheless. And that was enough for most people. At this period of time, Islam was still relatively new in sub-Saharan Africa. It had only been about 150 years since the Empire of Ghana had become a Muslim state. While Islam was an important factor in the early Mali Empire, it was not the central force of power it would become in later years. So it shouldn't come as a surprise that Sundjata ignored several Islamic protocols. He was considered a generous man who did not make elaborate displays of wealth, but he did not fast during Ramadan and may have practiced witchcraft. However, by all accounts, Sundjata was a fair and just ruler. While he may have been a little too quick to send his armies into battle at the slightest provocation, he treated his subjects fairly. The laws of Mali were strict, but they were applied equally on all, regardless of social status. He sent his children to live in other kingdoms and invited the children of other kings to live with him. Sundjata believed that children who learned about other lands would be less willing to go to war against them later in life. Sundiata Keita died in 1255 after ruling Mali for 25 years. If you'd like to know more about some of the bad things that happened during Mansa Musa's Hajj pilgrimage, click the video to the left. And if you'd like to hear a lecture I gave on the West African Muslim empires, click the video to the right.